the second installment in a series of video resources to encourage the church to feel confident and joyful in telling the story of the gospel. We make this resource available in the church foyer. Hope that you'll pick it up and be glad to share it with people who might not know about the story of Jesus Christ. And so this track is available both in print form and in an app option for your phone, so that you can have it with you and walk through people who don't know the amazing story that is the gospel. There is a workbook also available in the foyer, and that's what we're focusing on today. It's the second part in the series. We talked last time in another video link, which you can find here on Gospel to Glory. We talked about what storytelling is and how all storytelling really points to the story of God and His story in the gospel. Today we want to talk about the second part of the story, and that is creation. Many people know stories from the Bible, but do you know the story of the Bible? Knowing stories from the Bible, but not knowing the story of the Bible is like having a bunch of pearls, but having no string to bring them all together to make a necklace. That's what the gospel is. It's the full necklace. It's the full story. And so that's what we're talking through today. So if you have your notes and you want to look at this section on creation, I want us to consider that the main character of the story is the one eternal triune God. Let me tell you 10 things about this God who introduces himself to us right away in the beginning of the story. God is the main character. Isaiah 45:5 reminds us the center character is God, saying, I am the Lord. There is no one. Beside me, there is no God. Secondly, He is eternal, or God is eternal. Genesis starts in the first verse, and it just says, in the beginning, God. Before there was beginning, God was there. There's no record of God revealing himself and saying, and this is when I began. He is eternal. Third, God is triune. God is eternal, but not alone. Triune Godhead. We are commissioned in telling the story to go make disciples. Part of making disciples is to baptize converts or believers. And we baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God is a triune God. Fourth, God is not a private God. He's not an unknowable God. He's a communicating or talking God. In Genesis 1, the third verse, and God said. God spoke. He is, as he begins to speak, he tells us that he is the creator of everything. Isaiah 40:28, the Lord is everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. Sixth, he is the king and sovereign ruler of all. Listen as I read Psalm 95, verse 3, telling us that our God, the God of the Bible, the main character of the story of creation and the gospel, describes himself as king, sovereign ruler. For the Lord is a great God and a great king above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, the heights of the mountain are his also. The sea is his, for he has made it. His hands formed the dry land. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the sheep of his hand. Our God is king and ruler. He owns and possesses everything. Seventh, this leads us to understand if he really is king and sovereign ruler, then we admit reasonably that he is the holy and righteous judge. He is the holy and righteous judge. If what he has made is not fulfilling his purpose, if it's not fulfilling his will expressed to his creation, then he has the right to judge it, to condemn. He is holy and righteous. Genesis 18:25 says, "Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" Number 8 in your notes, he is a God full of love, compassion, mercy, and goodness. He is a God full of love, compassion, mercy, and goodness. We could read John 1, or 1 John 4:16, God is love. Psalm 136, give thanks to the God of heaven, his steadfast love endures forever. Psalm 25:6, remembering your mercy, O Lord, and your steadfast love. They have been from old. The love, compassion, mercy, and goodness. Number 9, God is holy. Isaiah 6:3, we find that all that is revealed to us of our God, all of his attributes, come together in perfect harmony to be what is the description of holiness. Isaiah 6:3, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God. Holiness is the sum total of his perfect otherness. There's communicable attributes in God, like love. We hear that he is loving, therefore we love, because he first loved us. But there are incommunicable attributes, things that we can't begin to relate to. He is omnipresent. God is everywhere. David says, if I rode a beam of sunlight down to the bottom of the ocean, I would find you there. That's incommunicable. We don't have illustrations. We can't say, well, yeah, God's attributes are like this. There are some things that are only God-like. This is holiness. It's his complete otherness. The 10th thing is really the amazing blessing. All these things that God is, all these things that we find him to reveal to us are not changing. God is unchanging. Malachi 3:6, for I, the Lord, do not change. Every story has an author and then main characters. And in the Bible, God is both the author and the main character. This story is about God. This story is a story of a perfect author, a perfect main character, and his perfect work in creation. Now, as we tell the story of creation, and as we tell the story of the gospel, we need to keep in mind that we're really telling a story that is about God. The whole story is written and recorded and preserved for God's glory. The whole story has one specific purpose: the glory of God. Let me give you a couple blanks for you to fill in. When we think about the glory of God, the universe itself speaks of the vastness of God's creation, and therefore God himself. Psalm 8:3. I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place. Second, the earth itself. If that is the universe, the earth itself speaks of the majesty of God's creation. The earth is unique among all the planets. It's a place that could sustain life, created beautifully by God. It's a place that is incredibly beautiful. Number 3, in that universe is that world, and in that world there is one specific or unique part of creation, and that's mankind. That's human beings. Humans are the highlight of God's creation. In Genesis 1:26, God is speaking with God, the Godhead, triunity, and they say to each other, let us make man in our image. Nothing else in creation is bearing the glorious image of God and its createdness. Nothing else is bearing the image of God. God created men and women. As we tell this story, there are a couple of highlights that we can't forget. We need to keep in mind that we're talking to other image bearers about their commission by God to rule and subdue creation, to reflect communion and intimacy in their relationships, especially marriage, to reflect communion and intimacy, to be fruitful and multiply through work and having children, to be fruitful and multiply, to reflect God's image in being able to communicate and loving others, and showing kindness, and being creative ourselves. We aren't just God's image bearer, but we are a communicator of God's image. We have to be thoughtful of how we are relaying God's image through our action. Everything God created worked together perfectly, just the way it was supposed to. When God made everything, he saw that all that he had made was good. He says in Genesis 1:31, "Behold, it is very good." Not just acceptable, not just decent, it is very good. At the beginning, Adam and Eve are in perfect harmony with God. They are in perfect harmony with all of creation. And they are in perfect harmony with each other. Let me ask you a question as we think about the perfection of God's creation. In the garden, do you think there's part of every person that is trying to find a way to get back to that state of perfect harmony? Do you think every person is grappling for some solution to the emptiness they feel where harmony used to exist? Listen as I read from Joe Coffey in Red Like Blood. He says, "It was not the sunrise that made it all paradise. It was the harmony. Adam sits with God looking at the sunrise. Everything in his world is at a state of unbroken relationship. All of it. He sits there with God, without guilt and shame. The presence of God is nothing but sheer pleasure. He doesn't hide. He doesn't grovel for forgiveness. His mind doesn't race, wondering if he has some unconfessed sin lurking in the shadow. He's in perfect relationship with God and with God's world. He is at peace, at every level and in every way." The Hebrews called this shalom. Shalom is wholeness of life and peace. Now, I want to give you an exercise now. Would you please craft the narrative in your own words? We're talking about this story by God, about God. Would you please take some time, you have some space in your workbook, and would you please write out this story? The story that begins with, "In the beginning, God," and flows through the state of God's creation existing in harmony. Describe the garden in your own words. How you see the garden being a provision of God and God's plan for us. I would encourage you, lastly, to practice the narrative out loud. Practice the narrative. Say it, even out loud. It can be embarrassing. You might want to make sure that your family is not in the other room and thinks you're talking to yourself. But would you consider saying the narrative of God's introduction of the story in creation, saying it out loud? I would encourage you to do that 5 times. I think that you could commit that to memory. You could tell the story more accurately and appropriately if you had it committed to memory. 2 Corinthians 5 tells us about our commission by God to be ambassadors. To be ambassadors, to be spokesmen of the story. I would encourage you to write it out, to speak it to yourself, and be prepared to tell the story with other people. And don't forget, like every great story, it has a beginning that is very important. Sometimes when we tell the story, we might think that the story is, the sum total of it is just the cross of Jesus Christ. There is so much to this story, and it all needs to be told. It's all God's story, and it all matters. I believe that God blesses our faithfulness to telling the whole story. Thank you.